Okay, as we're gathering, I will start momentarily the learning sponsors, but again, a reminder that the money must be given in by Tuesday, the 31st, in order to participate in the Siyum on Friday morning, November 3rd.
At the regular scheduled time.
Okay, so the Siyum will be a breakfast. Right. I checked with Ernie, did register and pay.
Okay,
And I believe that Rabbi Shimon Green is also going to come.
very good. More than welcome.
Okay. I did not announce it yesterday at the Shabbos learning,
Good. You put it in the bullet.
but it was in the
They can
bulletin.
read.
Well, not everybody reads, as I learned by the fact that somebody had to remind a certain individual who learns the daf every day. Didn't you see it in the bulletin? Oh, no, I didn't read it.
You have 15. So there could be one or two more.
Did Pacey Ackerman sign it?
Not yet. You was told yesterday.
He was what?
You was told about it.
I'm sure, I know you did. You re-informed him. You weren't the only one. Okay? Learning sponsors. A year of learning, Friends of Malaskotsky, Moshe Zelig, Ben Mordechai, Martin Lippman and family in memory of his wife, Malka Chana Bat Pinchas. Friends of Herb Jeremiah, Tzvi Ben Zev, Friends of Sam Coleman, Shmuel Ben Yaakov, Friends of Gideon Lazinski, Mordechai Shlomo Ben Meir, Bella and David Adler in memory of her father, Eliyahu Ben Yosef Cohen, those who were inspired by our Rebbetzin Emerita, Sheila Shapiro, Sarah Esther Malkabat, Meshulam Yisachar, Gail and Leslie Kaplan, in memory of their parents, Mushka Shprinza Bat Yosef Chaim Bachava, Chanan Ben Moshe Eliezer Vachana, Pesha Bat Shmuel Yitzchak Halevi V'Tzipora, Yisra Ben Yoel Moshe HaKohen Vachana, Rexford Friends of Gladys Sherman, Gutta Bat Meir, Michael Klein and Friends of Judah Klein, Yehuda Tzvi Ben Chaim, Marsha Brana in memory of her husband, Arav Yerachmiel Ben Shmuel, Month of Learning by Reuven and Susan Podolsky in memory of his father, Tzvi Ben Pinchas, a week of learning by Chaim Aber in memory of his father, Aaron Meir, by Ruth Burian in memory of her husband, Moshe Ben Mordechai. Today being the 29th of the month. Okay. We have a day of learning by Robert Lieberman in memory of his father, Avram Ben Shmuel. Okay. Also by Paula and Bob Bromberg in memory of her father, Menachem Ben Chaim. May the Shemas have an Aliyah, Krank Rafia, Vati Yashir, Hashem Latoya, and L'chol B'nai Israel, a good Gabanshtia.
Amen.
All right. Okay. All right. Where are we today? On top of Ayin Zion, Matnitin. We started the very top of the Amud with a new Mishnah. Okay? Okay. I had intended to draw up a diagram, okay, to start us off. And I noticed that my whiteboard is still there in the back, but I don't know what happened to all the markers, okay? So you'll have to wait till tomorrow to see the diagram, but I will just explain it briefly, okay? And then we'll go into the Gemara, okay? most of today's stuff deals with Isur Kahuna. Okay, if we looked at the pasuk again, okay, we would see that there are specific women that are mentioned, right? Lo tikach. Under that rubric, right, there is a example of a almanah, example of a grusha, the example of, well, we didn't get there yet. Okay, all right, almanah.
The Kohen can marry a
Wait, please. Okay, all right, almanah, grusha, chalutza, zona. Those are prohibited to a regular Kohen. Okay,
Kohen can marry an almana.
Those
Those are us to a Kohen.
Kohen, that's what I mean. Kohen Gadol, they're forbidden to the. Okay, and then in addition, okay, you have the issue of a Kohen Gadol, right? And then you have for a Kohen Hedyot, okay, there are prohibitions. Okay, so Isur Kahana implies you have a Kohen marrying a certain woman. Okay, if the Torah indicates that it is a question of the status of the woman, okay, which could be either as we said, a almana, grusha, zona, things like that. The question is, what about also a chalala? Right? So we have a situation where the Kohen marries a woman, and aside from those examples of, as I said, almana, grusha, chalutza, zona, okay, you have the situation of the chalala, okay, what is the result of the progeny? Okay, if it's a male progeny, it's going to clearly be a halal. If it's a female progeny, depending on the status of the woman, she could be a halala. It's possible she might not be a halala. What then is the status of the next generation?
Okay. The first generation, she's always a halal.
Wait. We'll get to it. Okay, so depending on the woman, that's the question of, is it always going to be a halal? Okay, and then the following generation, okay, when that generation marries, what is the status of their progeny? Okay, so as we go through the Gemara, we're going to see the Mishnah and Gemara attempts to deal with that kind of a situation. Isur for Kohen, Isur Kohen, what's the status of the woman? Okay, what's the status of the progeny, and of the next generation after that? Okay, Matnitin, says our Mishnah, Bat Halal Zachar. Okay, so we have the daughter of a male halal, Psula min hakuhuna le'olam. She is forbidden, or right, for ever marrying a Kohen. Okay. Next line, Yisrael shenasach halala, a male Israelite that marries a female halala. Okay, bitok sheira lekuna, his daughter, okay, is permissible or valid to marry in the kahuna. Okay, the third example, Chalal shenasa bat Yisrael. Okay, we have now a male halal that marries, okay, a Israelite girl, right? What happens then? Bito psula lekahuna. Okay, his daughter, okay, right, is again invalid to marry into the kahuna, right? So what happens? Those gives us a list here of 3 examples. And one of the questions that the Gemara is going to ask, of course, is why is it that the third example seems to be almost a repetition of the first case? Right? We'll come back to that in the Gemara.
No, because the first case, the marriage that the kid comes from is a love marriage. In the third case, it's generations later. And nonetheless, the
We'll get to that
all,
point.
well, but because you say it sounds the same, it's
Yeah,
not the
I'm
same.
telling you what the shir I had listened to presented. It almost seems the same. Okay, we're going to see through the Gemara that it's not the same. That is, there is a difference here. Okay, I just don't want to rush ahead. Okay, now we get to the next part of the Mishnah, where we have right now a three-way machloket. Okay, right? Rabbi Yehuda Omer, says Rabbi Yehuda, Bat Ger. All right, so now applying the issue of the ger or gerim, right? What happens there? Bat ger zachar, the daughter of a male convert, kibat halal zachar, is similar to the in status of the daughter of a male halal, which we come back to the first line of the Mishnah, where it says bat halal zachar, psula min hakahuna, therefore implying that a bat ger zachar would also be psula to the kahuna. Okay. Now we go on to the second part of that machloket. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, he has a different position. Yisrael shenasa gioret. Okay, a male Jew that marries a female convert. What's the status here? Bito kshera lekahuna. His daughter, okay, is permissible to enter the kahuna. Okay? Furthermore, Bagir shenasa bat Yisrael, and a male convert who marries a Jewish girl, right? Bito kshera lekahuna. So it would appear from Rabbi Eliezer's perspective, okay, at the moment, that if one of the partners, okay, is a valid Jew, then that daughter is eligible to marry into the kahuna. Okay? Aval ger shenasa gioret, but whereas the situation of a male convert marrying a female convert, bito psula lekahuna, that daughter from that marriage is not valid to marry into the kahuna. Right? Echad ger ve'echad avadim meshuchrarim afilu ad asara dorot ad shetehei imo miyisrael. Okay, so that continues the view, okay, of our second discussant, okay, by indicating that okay, whether it's the one being a ger or one being a freed slave, until for 10 generations, until the mother actually becomes a valid Israelite. All right, so that there's some discussion as to whether when it said 10 generations, it really means 10, or it's just a discussion of until multiple generations. Okay, that happens to be a separate argument between Rashi and Tosafot.
But Gerim, they're really Jews. So
that's what the Gemara is going to have to deal with, right? You have a valid question, Zev. So we're going to have to come back and see, does the Gemara address this, okay, in terms of this machloket? We've only gotten to see two opinions of a three-way machloket, which ultimately is going to become a four-way machloket. Okay?
A Kohen can't marry a Geuris.
Okay. All right. The assumption is that a Gioris, okay, there's a chashash that she is perhaps a zona. Okay, and that's why a Kohen cannot marry a Gioris. Okay, because you've got that, okay, situation. All right, now we get to our third member of the machloket, Rabbi Yossi Omer, af ger shenasa gioret, even in a situation where you have a male convert marrying a female convert, bitok shera lekahuna.
that's what I would say.
All right. Okay, so that is his view, Rabbi Yossi there, that basically,
we're changing your names.
okay, to the daughter there would be eligible to marry into the kahuna. So we have three different viewpoints here. Okay, again, Rabbi Yehuda compares a ger to a halal, okay, and therefore no validity for the kohana. Okay, Rabbi Eliezer disagrees and says it depends if one of the partners is a Israelite. Okay, okay, it's right. What happens? Not a ger. Okay, one of them. Right, it's one thing. Rabbi Yossi says no, they can marry. All right, let's get into our Gemara now. So the first question is that in our first statement in the Mishnah, it says le'olam, okay, that progeny of the halal, when it's a male halal, okay, forever, right? So ma'i le'olam, what do we mean by that? Mahu detema, what do you want to tell us? Midei dahava amitzri va'edomi. It's possible that it might be similar to the example that the Torah gives us in regards to the Egyptian or the Edomite, namely, Malahalan lachar shlosha dorot, where there after 3 generations, okay, we know that they are then permitted to enter the Yichus, enter the Kal Hashem. Afkanami lachar shlosha dorot. So maybe it's possible here we might think also the criteria would be 3 generations. Kamash Malan comes to teach us that that's not the case. Right? We go now to the second example in the Mishnah. Yisrael shenasach halala, a male Israelite that marries a female non-consecrated Bas Kohen. Right? So minahani mili, and what's our basis for knowing this? Amar Rabbi Yochanan mishum Rabbi Shimon. And then Rabbi Yochanan, the name of Rabbi Shimon, ne'amar kan. Since it says here, velo yichalel zaro ba'amav, he cannot profane his progeny, okay, among his people. V'ne'amar lahalan, and it's also written elsewhere in another pasuk, right? Lo yitame ba'al ba'amav, okay, that he cannot become tame, okay, among his people, right? And the second pasuk, lo yitame ba'al ba'amav, right, applies to a Kohen Gadol.
The first
No,
is the
regular.
Kohen Gadol. This is,
Second one is
Kohen Edyot.
Kedron, okay,
Second is Kohen.
second, right? All right, malahalan zecharim, but in either case, since it applies only to the males, okay, velona kevot and not the females, afkan zecharim velona kevot. So here we're saying it applies also, halal applies to the males and not to the females.
After the first door.
Okay, ela me'ata. But from here, what do we learn? Bito shel Kohen Gadol tishtare, that maybe the daughter of a Kohen Gadol should be permitted, right? So why is that the case? If we're applying that it only applies to males, mikativ bano, does the pasuk say his son?
Kohen.
All right, regarding that situation, zaro kativ. No, it says his progeny. That's what's written. Lo yichalel zaro ba'ama, clearly spelling out that it cannot, right? He should not profane his progeny, right, or his offspring, okay, in this situation, okay. Therefore, what happens? Bat beno tishtare, okay, and therefore that the next generation, the daughter of his son, she should be permitted, okay. Ktiv, but it's written lo yichalel zaro. Okay, and again, the pasuk says he should not profane his progeny. Since we say it says zaro, makish zaro lo, we make an association and apply, okay, to the Kohen Gadol regarding the offspring has to be like him. Okay? That's how that hekesh is understood. So that's the point. Mahu bito psula, the same way, okay, his daughter would be psula, af beno bito psula, So likewise, the daughter of his son also would be psula, invalid. Okay? Bat bito titzar. So we ask the question, well, what about the daughter of his daughter? Is she going to be considered also forbidden? Okay. Imkain gzera shava. Okay. Therefore, we would seem to imply that this seems to be a case of an gzera shava. Maya hani. So what do we do with that? Okay. So, okay. In other words, is the gzera shava really a valid gzera shava? Okay. That's the question that we're left hanging. Right? The Gemara picks up though and continues. Chalal shenasa bat Yisrael. Okay, now we get to the third statement from our Mishnah. Okay, that the Chalal, deconsecrated, desanctified Kohen, marries a normal Israelite girl, Bito Psula. Okay, we say the daughter then is invalid, right? Ha Tanale Resha. Here, isn't that similar to what was taught in the first statement of our Mishnah? Namely, that statement said, Bat Chalal Zachar Psula min kohuna le'olam. That indicated that the daughter of a male Chalal is invalid from marrying into the kohuna forever. So that would appear initially to be no different than the third statement. Okay? Aide de Tana Resha. But since we see it was taught that way in the opening statement, Yisrael Shenasach Halala, that this statement says, in this case, that a male Israelite who marries a Halala, Tana Nami Sefer, that we teach it also, again, this way in the end of the Mishnah. Why is that the case? Namely, Halal Shenasa Bat Yisrael. Why? Because here we have an example of the Halal marrying a Israelite daughter. So what happens? Matniden load. Okay. So the implication here is that it's not exactly the same statement, okay, as the very first statement. That says Bat Halal Zachar Sulam Le'olam, that the daughter of a male Halal is invalid forever. And our third statement, telling us Halal Shenasa Bat Yisrael, okay, that the Halal who marries the daughter, a valid Jewish woman, his daughter is, okay, is invalid to Kahuna. That is not exactly the same statement, okay, because we might think in that situation that since it's even though she's the daughter of a Halal, maybe she should not be, or the next generation should not be Pasul. That's the implication. And the understanding then is that it's a stylistic point here. Okay. Now we go on to the next piece of the Gemara. Halal shenasa bat Yisrael bito psula. Right. So this again was our third statement from the Mishnah. What happens? Ha tana le resha. We said bat halal zachar psula min hakuna leolam. Ide de tana resha. But since they taught in the structure of the Mishnah that Yisrael shenasach halala is where an Israelite marries a halala. Tana nami seifa. They also taught that stylistically. Halal shenasa bat Yisrael. Okay, that's the case. Now, matnitin delo karabi dustai ben Yehuda. That it would appear then that our Mishnah is not according to Rabbi Dustai ben Yehuda, to Tanya. Why? Because we see as follows that he teaches in a Braita. Rabbi Dustai ben Yehuda Omer, Keshem shebnei Yisrael mikvat tahara lechalalot, the same way that the male Israelites, okay, can be like a purifying source, I'll say, for female chalalot. Kach benot Yisrael mikvat tahara lechalalein. So likewise, valid Jewish women can be a purifying source to male chalalim. Okay.
Meaning that their children are.
In other words,
not
that the
halal.
next generation would not continue to be chalalim. Okay. My Tama the Rabbi Dustai Bar Yehuda. What was his reasoning in that regard? Amar Kra, he bases it on a pasuk. Says the pasuk, Lo yichalel zaro ba'amav, that one cannot profane his progeny among his nation. Ba'am echad hu demecha. In other words, when both parties, the male and the female, are from the same status, okay, that
Ba'am echad means for one generation. The word
that's the pshat that you have. I'm sharing the pshat that I learned from a different shira. That's all. I'm not disagreeing that yours could be that way. I'm just sharing the pshat that I had from there. Okay, ma'amav here, okay, is that both the male and the female, if they're from the same status. Okay, that's all right. That's where it could be. B'shnei amami. Okay, but if they're from different status, all right, eino mochel, that it does not become a situation of being machul. Tanu Rabbanan. Okay, so the Mishnah goes a new bright. Lo yichalel zaro, where it says he cannot profane his progeny. Ein li ela zaro, he atzma minayin. So if we say that would seem to imply that only the profanation of the progeny is based on that status. He atzma minayin. How do we know that the woman herself, the one he marries, becomes a chalala? That's the question. Amart kal v'chomer. We might say here that it's a kal v'chomer situation. Ma zaro shelo avad avera mitchalem. Whereas his progeny who did not commit any kind of a sin becomes profaned. He she'avra avera, the woman, okay, with whom he had this inappropriate liaison, okay, eino din shemitchalelet, is it not the case that she becomes profaned as well, implying that the profanation has to occur in a situation where one was initially valid and then became, because of an act, profaned. Okay, the zaro, the progeny, did not do anything. Okay, so to say to become profaned must mean that it must be someone who did an act that resulted in a change of that person's status in some way. Okay, hu atzmo yochiach. Okay, but if we're going to question this kal v'chomer, okay, it itself will bring proof that maybe it's problematic, right? She'avad avera. Okay, so okay. She'avar avera. That's what I said. Okay, all right. That the person committed a sin. Ve'ein mitchalel. Okay. So what about the fact that, right, but becoming profaned in that situation? Malahu shekain ein mitchalel b'chol. Okay, but what about the situation that the Kohen himself, who nevertheless who committed an avera, okay, he doesn't become profane. Okay, b'chol makom, in any case. In other words, the implication here again implies a change of status, particularly regards the woman. But the Kohen himself, were he to marry a woman that the Torah says lo yikach, what's his status? He becomes in suspension, okay, until he divorces the woman. Okay, all right. That's the situation, right? In other words, he can't carry. Once he divorces her, right, he can then resume his normal officiating in that as a Kohen. Okay, that's the situation. Malahu shokain ein mitchalel b'kol makom, where he doesn't become profane, the Kohen, in any situation. Tomar behi shemit chalelet b'chol makom. Will you say? Are you going to say that she becomes profane in any of these situations, in any of the examples? Okay, whether she's a grusha, chalala, grusha, zona, etc. Right? These situations, right? These situations. Okay. V'im nafshecha lomar. And if you want to suggest a different perspective, okay, to come to this conclusion as to how is it that the woman becomes a chalala, amar kra. We have a pasuk that we're going to darshan. The pasuk says, lo yichalel zaro. Okay, he's not to profane his progeny. How do we understand that? Okay, with an adjustment of the nikud, lo yichulal ze shehi kasher v'nitchalal. Okay, to become profaned is how we'll translate lo yichulal. All right, ze sheya kasher, the one who was earlier valid, namely the woman, v'nitchalal, and becomes profaned. Mai im nafshecha lomar. What do you mean when you say, if we want to consider the following? V'chitema ikela mifrach. And is it possible to challenge this?
The man
Right.
if you don't like the
Right? If you
owner
don't suggest
because-
this example, right? Malizaro, where what when we mean when we say to his progeny, shekain yitzirato ba'avera. Okay, that child was created through a sinful act. Amar kra. Therefore, we have the pasuk that we darshan that says lo yichalel, lo yichulal. Okay, you're not profane, not cause profanation. Okay, zeh shaya kasher v'nitchalal, the one that had been initially valid and then became profane,
which is the wife.
which is the woman in that situation. Okay, a new Braita. Tanu Rabbanan. We raise the following in the Braita. Ezo hi chalala. Which is the one that we consider a chalala? Kol shel nolda min hapsulim. Anyone that is born from a invalid yichus status. My psulim. What do we mean when we say psulim? Ilema psulim lo. If we're going to say that they're invalid to him. Hare machazer grushato dipsula lo. What about the example of a man who takes back his divorced wife after she has married somebody else in that situation? Nevertheless, ubaneha sharim. Okay, all right. She is invalid, but the children aren't impacted in that situation. They're still valid. All right. Dichtiv. Why? Because the pasuk says to'eva he. It says that the abomination, I'm going to translate it, is her. Okay, in that way. He to'eva. She is the abomination because of her acts. Right? Ve'ein baneha to'avim. But her progeny, her children, are not the abomination. Amar Rav Yehuda, says Rav Yehuda hachikama. This is what it means to be saying. Ezo hi chalala. What do we mean by the fact that she is desanctified? Kol shenolda min psul kuhuna. One who is born from an invalid or invalidity, if I can use that word, in terms of the kahuna. Nolda, born in, yes. Lo nolda lo, not born no. But wait a second. We'll give other examples of situations where a woman could marry a Kohen. The Torah tells us lo yikach, and those women become also like a chalala, namely, hare almana, grusha, zona. Okay, here's three examples where those cases, the woman then becomes considered a chalala. In addition to, I'm going to say, all right, okay, right, delo nolda v'kahavya chalala, and that's not a case of birth, and yet she becomes considered a chalala. Ama Rava, says Rava, hachi kama. This is what it means to tell us. Ezo chalala, which do we mean by chalala? Muskeret shelo hayala sha'at hakosher klal. Does this mean that she never had any moment or any time of having been valid whatsoever?
Being born into.
Right? Kol shenolda min psul kahuna. All that are born, okay, from a invalid relationship to a kahuna, my muskeret. So what do we mean when we say that this is reminded or stated? Amar Rav Yitzchak ba'avin hachi ka'amar. This is what we mean, right? In this regards to the Braita. Ezo hi chalala. What do we mean by chalala? She'ikara midivrei Torah. That it's originally based on the words of Torah. Ve'ein tzrichin lefaresh midivrei sofrim. But we do not have to explain it in more detail regarding rabbinic, right? Kol shenolda min psulei kahuna. Those that were born, clearly, from any invalidity regarding the kahuna. Tanu Rabbanu. Now, we get another state Braita, and this Braita is going to focus more on the Kohen Gadol status. Okay? Almana, almana, almana. Okay, three times the word widow. Eino chayav ela achat. Okay, he is only over on one,
It's one malchus.
such a status, on one situation, and therefore would imply that his punishment is only one set of malchus. Grusha, grusha, grusha. Okay, again, were he to have relations, okay, with a divorcee, 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 eino chayav ela achat. Again, it would seem that he's only over on one set of prohibitions, and therefore would only be receiving one set of malchus again. Now, however, if we see that his transgression was a series with a almanah, grusha, chalala, zona, in that specific order, okay, okay, all right.
It's always the same.
Well, we'll get to it. We'll get to it. All right. All right. Don't ruin the right suspense. Right. Okay. All right. Zman shehem kaseder, says the Gemara. At the time that they are in that order, and that's important because the Gemara in the next Amud is going to discuss why did it have to be in that order. Okay. Zman shehem kaseder. Chayav al kol echad ve'echad. In that situation, with a widow, a divorcee, a chalala, and a zona, he would have transgressed 4 different sets of prohibitions and required to get 4 sets of malchus. Boy, would his back be sore. Okay, all right.
It might be worth it.
Okay, now what happens? Zinta, v'nit chalala, v'nit garsha, v'nit armala. If it was a situation, however, in a different order.
Reverse order.
Okay, right? What happens? Eino chayav ela achat. In that situation, it would again only be considered one set of prohibitions and only one set, okay, of malchus. No, you just got to find the right woman. That's okay. What's going to happen? We're going to see. Amamar, says the master. Almanah. All right, amana. In our example that the Braita said, a widow, a widow, a widow, eino chayav ela achat, where it said he was only transgressing one set. Hi, amana hechidami. This widow, what can we compare it to?
Without it
Right,
become
what's
a
the status? All right. Ilema sheba al almanat Ruvain. If we're going to say that he had relations with the widow of Ruvain, va'almanat Shimon, and then the widow of Shimon, va'al almanat Levi, and then the widow of Levi. Amai eno chayav el echad. Why is he only transgressing one set? Right? As our Gemara goes on now. So it says the Gemara, Hare Gufin Mechulakin. These seem to be separate entities. Hare Shemot Mechulakin. Okay, they seem to imply separate names, separate persons. Ele Sheba al Amana Achat Shalosh Biot. But rather he had relations with the same widow 3 times. Okay. All right. Hey Chidami, how is that the case?
What do you mean?
The
She
second
married each one of them?
No. If he fools around with 3 widows who are separate human beings,
Yeah.
so why doesn't he get punished for all 3?
Right.
Right.
So what? That was possibility 1. Now
So
we
we
have
say no.
possibility 2. He frequently visited
The same
the
woman,
same
but
widow.
she had been married.
So that's
She had been
possibility
married.
that he did the widow, he did the widow.
So it's a
Same
different case.
lady, same,
Different
and
situation.
he just visits her Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday.
All right.
Well,
Same woman gave him 7 seconds.
Right.
3 times.
All right. So wait a second. We're not done with this. Idolo atru beit. If they didn't warn him before each time, pshita, it's obvious. The eno chayav elacha. That he would. It's obvious that he wouldn't be transgressing except for one time. Ela da atru beit akol chada v'chada. No, they warned him each and every time. Don't visit Mrs. McGillicuddy. Okay, whatever. Okay, no, please, Reuven.
No, but it's the Gemara.
Amai eno chayav elachad. Why then would he only be transgression for a single event? Vahatnan. But haven't we learned elsewhere in the Mishnah? Nazir shahaya shoteh yayin kol hayom kulo. That when a Nazirite was drinking wine the entire day, eno chayav elachad. He only commits one transgression. Amru lo al tishteh al tishteh. But they said to him before each time, don't drink, don't drink. V'hu shoteh, and he drinks. Chayav al kol echad ve'echad. Then he is transgressing, and each time he drinks, he is over. Correct. Lo tzricha. No, we needed this one. Sheba al almanat Ruvain, shaita almanat Shimon, shaita almanat Levi. That he had relations with the same woman who was the widow of Ruvain, as well as the widow of Shimon, as well as the widow of Levi. The same widow. We call her the Black Widow. Right? All right?
I would stay away.
All right? Mahu detema. Okay, what then are you trying to tell us? Hare Shemot Mechulakim. But the names are different. Kamash Malan Gufim Mechulakim Ba'ina. Which would seem to tell us that it needs to be 3 different entities. That's what we need. Veleka. And that's not the case here. Right?
Because it's the same woman.
Right, because it's the same woman, so it's only one transgression.
And
Unless
it's
they
only one
warned him
act.
of one, unless they warned him in between
Right.
each
No,
time.
it's only one act. But she is widowed thrice.
Right,
So are we kolel all the aveiras? No.
right.
One act.
So
one
let's
widow.
come back, says the Gemara, to our earlier case, where we listed it in a particular order. Almana, Grusha, Chalala, Zona. Okay? All right, so now we're going to get into a slightly different new topic, which is called Isur Chal al Isur, or Isur Mosif. Okay? Can you say that one act on top of another, Okay, so, and the Gemara is going to clarify this for us. To what degree do we say it increases his culpability? Okay, or does it not increase his culpability? Okay, so what happens, says our Gemara? Amana ugrusha v'chalala zona. Hi Tana, Maika Savan. The Tana who said it had to be in this particular order, what was his view, his opinion? Ika Savar Isur Chal al Isur. If it's such that he believes that one prohibition can be added on top of an earlier prohibition, okay? If that's the case, Ipchanami, then the order exactly shouldn't matter, and it should be either whatever the order is. It could be in the reverse order. Ve'ika savar, but if he's of the opinion, ein isur chalal isur, that we do not say one prohibition adds to the transgressions his culpability on top of another. Afilu kaseder hazen nami lo. Even according to this order, if he doesn't hold by that, okay, then it shouldn't be the case, and it should be that he would only get a single set of malchus for a single transgression. No. Amar Rava, says Rava the follows. Okay. Hi Tana, this particular Tana, who insisted on this specific order. I want to read here. Okay. How does he hold? Hi Tana. Isur chal al isur litle. He does not hold by the concept of normally one prohibition on top of another. However, I'm going to read into here, Isur mosif itle. He does, however, hold by the concept, excuse me, of Isur mosif. Sorry, where one focuses on the object, and the more Isur does increase the transgression.
More expansive.
Okay, because it is a greater, understood be a greater or more severe act.
More expansive.
That's what I'm saying. Okay, situation. Okay, Isur mosif itle. All right, almana asura lekohen gadol. Why? Because we've learned, for example, that a widow is prohibited to a kohen gadol. V'sharya lekohen hedyat, but she is permitted, a widow, to a common kohen. Havya la grusha. But then we have the example of a divorcee. Okay, migo de itusaf la isura legabe kohen hedyat, which seems to be that we're adding, okay, a greater expanding. I'll use that word, expanding. I think is a better phrase. Expanding the prohibition then regarding the common code, itusaf le isura, and therefore we've expanded one prohibition on top of an earlier prohibition. Okay, legabe kohen gadol, in regards to the kohen gadol. Va'adayin shaya lemicha batruma. But in this case, okay, a bat kohen who has no children, okay, therefore would still be eligible to eat truma. Havya la chalala, but then she becomes a chalala, and in that situation, migo de itusaf isura lemechal batruma. Then by becoming a chalala, we've expanded the Isur even further because of the reason that now she is no longer eligible to eat her father's truma. Okay, in that situation, itusaf isura legabe kohen gadol, and that add a further expanded another level of prohibition in the example of the kohen gadol. Okay. So what about our third case in that list, right? Zona.
Fourth case.
A fourth case. That next case, the zona, My Isur Mosif Idbe. What addition do we have here in this example? Amar Rav Chana, Bar Rav Katinas, he says, Ho'il v'shem znut posel b'Yisrael. Since we have a situation that even with a common Israelite, there is already an Isur not to marry a
According
Zona.
to him, if it's no.
Okay, in that case, all right, then I'm going to take that example and say, and I could use, let's say, for example, a Kal V'chomer if I wanted to. Okay,
No, it's more expansive.
it is.
It ushers her to any man, not just the Buddha.
Right. But I'm saying if it applies to the Israelite, certainly it's going to apply to the Kohen. Okay?
So you
All right. All right. So what happens? V'shem znut posel b'Yisrael. Tane Tana, Kame de Rav Shesha.
No,
Okay.
that's a period paragraph.
Right? So that's the case. So the married woman with the affair, that's the example. Now, we have a statement. Okay, with a regular Kohen Gadol. Continue. Tane Tana Kame de Rav Sheshet. Kol Shahu Bayikach. Any situation where the Torah has mandated and he shall take. Harehu below Yikach. The flip side of that is therefore you're forbidden to take. Okay. Kol she'eno b'yikach. Those that are not included and you shall take, in other words, marry, eno below yikach, are not included in the prohibition, the flip side. Prat lekohen, all right, with the exception the kohen gadol, sheba al achoto amana. What does he do? He has relations with a widow who happens to be his sister. Okay.
Sister who happens to be a widow.
Okay. All right. So what happens? Well, we got to put a little. Right. Amar lachmani. Okay, I would say to him. Okay, saying to what? According to whom? Rabbi Shimon. This is the view of Rabbi Shimon. Da amar ein isur chalal isur. But he holds that
That case.
that in that situation, you have a situation where you don't have a progression of prohibitions. The Tanya Rabbi Shimon Omer. Why? Because Rabbi Shimon was of the opinion, ha'ochel nevela b'yom ha'kippurim patur, that one who eats nevela on Yom Kippur is exempt.
It's putter from Yom
Okay.
Kippur.
All right, is exempt from what? From a punishment for Yom Kippur, but not necessarily from a punishment of eating nevela. Now, the side discussion could be which came first. Okay, eating the nevela or Yom Kippur.
Well, it was Nevela the day before.
Okay, so
it
that
does-
would be
so
another
that's
whole argument.
That's the primary.
Okay, that's the assumption.
Rejected it on Yom
Okay,
Kippur.
amre, but here we say isur chalo isur. We might say that there is a progression of isurim there. Afilu tema rabbanan, and in that case we might even say it's not according to Rabbi Shimon, but according to the view of the rabbis. Ki amre rabbanan isur chalal isur. For when the rabbis say there is a progression of one isur to another.
Isur Halal Isur is no progression, it's just a pile. Isur Mosif is a progression.
Okay, depends on how you explain it. Okay, Hani mili isur chamor al isur kal. What the rabbis had in mind is when a more stringent prohibition became added to a lesser stringent prohibition. Okay, about isur kal al isur chamor, but when it's a lesser prohibition that's added to a more stringent prohibition, lo chayil. It
That's
does
like
not
the
apply.
Almana's sister.
Okay, it does not apply. Ikeda amri. But there are those who say, Hamani, according to whom? Rabbananhi. It's according to the view of the rabbis. The amre that they say, Isur chal al Isur, that there is this higher status of one Isur upon another. V'chi amre rabbanan Isur chal al Isur. And that when the rabbis say that one prohibition can be added on top of another. Hanimili isur chamor al isur kal. That this is when a more stringent prohibition is on a less stringent prohibition. Aval isur kal al isur chamor lo chayil. But a less stringent on top of a more stringent prohibition doesn't apply. The Rabbi Shimon, because we're at the position of Rabbi Shimon, Hashta in this case, Isur Chamor al Isur Kal lo chayil, because the more stringent prohibition on a lesser stringent would not apply. Isur Kal al Isur Chamor mebaye. With regards to a less stringent on top of a more stringent, would we even have to ask about that? Raise the question. Okay. Mahu detema. So what then are you trying to tell us? Isur kuna shani. Maybe we might think with regards to Rabbi Shimon, he might say, since an Isur applying to the Kuna, and there are so many other laws applying to Kuna that make their status so unique and different, maybe the Isurim or other like this is different. Kamash Malan. No, that's not the case. Okay. Now, if we continue a little bit more, all right, we got a couple more minutes. Amale Rav Papa Abaye. Says Rav Papa Abaye, we get to a new bright. Yisrael haba choto. Okay, an Israelite that has relations with his sister. Zona mashvela. He makes her into like a zona. Chalala mashvela, olo mashvela. Okay, but what about the fact, okay, with regards to making
her a halal.
chalala? Okay, in that case, what about that? Mi amrinin kal v'chomer. Do we use a kal v'chomer here in this particular case? Mechai ve'lavin havya chalala. That we say that any
Stam lav.
okay, that I'm going to phrase it just a little differently, but you're right. Do we say that in an example that where there is a lav, okay, that in this case it's going to automatically render the woman a chalala, okay, as might, for example, Rabbi Akiva, who said that any lav situation renders the child a mamzer.
We're just talking about the Kohen has relations with a
Yes,
woman.
but I'm
that's a
saying he's
lav.
trying,
The kids are halal and the lady is halal.
right.
So where it's a kares or
Okay,
a nisa,
but
how much more?
well, that's the question. Mechai ve kritut lo kol shekain. Aren't we going to say that in a situation where we define it as a karet punishment, that therefore that's also going to render the woman a chalala? That's the situation. O dilma, or perhaps ein chalala elame isur kahuna, or perhaps she only becomes a chalala in regards to prohibitions where it's a
Only
prohibiting Kohen status. Amar le, okay, if they said to him, Ein isur chalala elame isur kahuna bilvad. Well, we might say then that there is no prohibition of chalala except in regards to Kohen status only. Amar Rava, says Rava, Mina ha milta the Amur Rabbanan. Where is this statement made from the rabbis? Ein chalala ela ki isur kahuna. That we seem to be saying that the woman does not become a chalala unless it's in regards to a Kohen prohibition. The Tanya, as we see in another brayta, lo yamar grusha b'Kohen gadol. You can't say in regards to the prohibition of a divorcee regarding the Kohen gadol. V'titi b'kal v'chomer mikohen hedyat. That maybe you might teach it based on a kal v'chomer from a common Kohen. Va'ana amina, and I would say, hashta the Kohen hedyat asura. Here we have a prohibition with the Kohen, the common Kohen. The Kohen gadol mebaye. We even have to raise the question that that prohibition should apply to a Kohen gadol. Lama nemra. Why then would it be said? Kashem shechaluka grusha mizona v'chalala b'kohen hedyat. The same way there is a distinction or separation indicating that the grusha is going to be a prohibition, different from that of the zonah or the chalala with regards to a common kohen. Kach chaluka b'kohen gadol. So likewise, there's a separate distinction of an isur regarding the kohen gadol. Pshita, that's obvious. Migra gare. Do we say that therefore his sanctity is diminished? Ele kashem shechaluka grusha mizona b'chalala b'kohen hedyat. But rather, the same way we've made a distinction, a separation regarding grusha from that of zona or chalala for a common kohen, kach almana chaluka migrusha v'chalala zona b'kohen gadol. So likewise, okay, regarding the widow, that's a separate and its own prohibition. I'm going to read in from that of a grusha or a chalala or a zona. Okay, from the kohen gadol. All right, chalala lama ne'emra. And why then did it bring up the topic of the chalala? Ein chalala ela mi'isur kuhuna, to tell us that there is no status of a chalala except in regards to prohibitions regarding a kohanim. Zona lama ne'emra. If that's the case, why did they include the issue of the zona? Ne'amar kan zona, v'ne'amar lahalan zona. It says in one case, zona, another pasuk zona, the Gezerah Shabbat here, attempt. Makan zaro chulin, af lahalan zaro chulin. So the same way that his progeny is going to be non-profane, so therefore, likewise, his progeny is profane. And then we're going to continue tomorrow with the bottom line, Amar Rav Ashi, etc. Okay?
He's not the bottom line.
No, he's not the bottom. The last line, right? Because I told you we're going to see in the next Amud that there's a fourth view to that three-way machlok.
Right.